You cannot consistently outperform your self-image. This is why people win the lottery and lose it within 7 years. Why some founders build fortunes and others collapse the moment they get close. Why the same opportunity changes someone's life and quietly destroys someone else's. The bank account follows the identity, not the other way around. And once the identity is correctly programmed, the wealth follows without effort, without forcing, without the daily war you have been fighting to push yourself towards something that does not yet feel like you. This is the destination of everything we have built across this series, the wealth identity. The state where the morning session feels like remembering instead of installing, where the pattern interrupts fire on their own, where opportunities you used to walk past are suddenly impossible to miss, where the work disappears because the work has already done its work. There is a phrase from psychologist and surgeon Maxwell Maltz that captures this entire video in one sentence. You cannot consistently outperform your self-image. You can outperform it for a day, for a week, for a quarterly burst of motivation that surprises everyone around you. But sustained, over months, over years, over the long arc that actually builds wealth and a life, your performance settles to whatever your self-image quietly accepts as normal. This is the ceiling, and it does not move with willpower. It does not move with goal setting. It does not move with another book or another seminar or another planner. It moves only when your self-image moves. Most people never make this distinction. They spend their entire adult lives trying to push their performance above the ceiling of their identity, working harder, being more disciplined, forcing more output through a self-image that quietly considers them average. And every time the gap between performance and identity gets too wide, the brain pulls them back down. This is not a failure of effort. This is a feature of how the mind protects its model of you. The wealthy person who sabotages their second venture. The founder who gets close and self-destructs. The lottery winner who, within 7 years, is back to roughly the financial state they came from. None of these people are weak. None of them lack discipline. They are simply being pulled by the gravity of their existing identity back to the version of themselves their subconscious has confirmed as real. You can rise above your identity briefly. You cannot live above it. This is why most attempts at change fail at exactly the same point. The motivation peaks for 30 days. The behavior changes. The bank account starts to grow, or the body starts to shift, or the work starts to land. And then, quietly, invisibly, something inside the person begins to whisper, "This is not who I am." And the brain begins, for 1,000 tiny choices, to bring them back. The careless decision that erases a quarter of progress. The hesitation that lets the deal slip. The fight with a partner that occupies the bandwidth that should have gone toward the work. Most people interpret this as a personal failing. It is not. It is the subconscious doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping the experience of you consistent with the model of you. The model that was installed in childhood, before you had any say in the matter. And until the model itself changes, this pattern repeats forever. This is the trap that catches almost everyone who has ever tried to better their life. And it is the trap this series has been quietly dismantling, video after video. Look at what we have actually built. In video 1, you learned what the subconscious is, and that 95% of your life is being run by a program installed before you could read. In video 2, you learned what specific program is running for most people, the scarcity blueprint, written into your nervous system in childhood, firing every day in adulthood beneath your conscious awareness. In video 3, you learned the brainwave windows where the gatekeeper steps aside, and how to find the moments where new programming can actually go in. In videos 4 and 5, you installed the morning protocol, 20 minutes of unfiltered access to the subconscious in theta, identity statements, visualization, and anchor to a state. In video 6, you learned the night protocol, The second window used to release the day, plant the intention, and run a sleep script your subconscious processes for 8 hours while you rest. In video 7, you learned the daily protocol, the all-day system that holds the morning install in place. Anchors fired throughout the day. Pattern interrupts that catch the old script before it locks in. Environment design that stops your inputs from undoing your work. Each video on its own is a tactic, but all of them together, running daily, compounding for months, do something specific. Something most personal development content never even attempts. They move your self-image. Slowly, deliberately, repetition by repetition, they replace the model your subconscious holds about who you are, about what you deserve, about what is normal, about what is possible. And once that model has shifted, really shifted, every other layer of your life begins to recalibrate around it. Without forcing, this is the wealth identity. And it is the destination this entire series has been building toward. Here is the part that determines whether the new identity becomes permanent or fades back into the old one. Your brain has a substance called myelin. Myelin is a fatty insulating sheath that wraps around neural pathways. The more often a pathway fires, the more myelin grows around it. The more myelin, the faster and more efficient the pathway becomes, and the more likely the brain is to use it as the default route. This is why repetition matters. This is why daily practice matters. This is why the all-day protocol matters. Every fire of the new state, every anchor pressed, every identity statement felt, every pattern interrupt run, all of it grows myelin around the new pathway. And the myelin around the old pathway, no longer used, slowly begins to thin. The timeline for myelinating a new pathway to the point of automatic default is not the 21 days of folklore. It is closer to 66 days for simple habits and significantly longer, often 6 to 12 months, for identity level change. The first 30 days, the new identity feels effortful. You have to remember. You have to choose. You are forcing the new pathway against the gravity of the old one. The next 30 days, it gets easier. The fire becomes a habit. The protocol becomes part of your texture. Somewhere between months 3 and 12, depending on the depth of the old programming and the consistency of the practice, the brain finishes the work. The new pathway becomes more myelinated than the old one. And from that point forward, without conscious effort, the brain begins to default to the new identity. The morning session stops feeling like installing and starts feeling like remembering. The pattern interrupts fire on their own. The anchors do not need to be deliberately pressed. The state arrives whenever the trigger does. The wealth identity becomes the path of least resistance. And the brain, which is metabolically expensive and always picks the most efficient route, simply runs you down it. Every day, by default, without your conscious involvement. This is what permanence actually looks like neurologically. It is not a feeling. It is a structural change in your nervous system. And it is available to anyone who runs the protocols long enough to let the myelin grow. So how do you know when the wealth identity is locking in? There are markers. Specific signs you will notice as the new pathways become more myelinated than the old ones. The first marker is the disappearance of strain. Early in the work, the morning session feels like a discipline. You have to make yourself do it. The identity statements feel performative. You say them, but you do not yet feel them. The visualization is something you are constructing, not something you are remembering. As the identity locks in, the strain quietly disappears. You sit down for the morning session because you want to, not because you have to. The identity statements feel obvious. The visualization feels less like creation and more like recall. You are not building the new identity in the session. You are visiting it. The second marker is the disappearance of old triggers. There were moments that used to fire your scarcity blueprint instantly. The conversation about money. The opportunity that felt too big. The room full of people you used to feel small around. Each of these used to produce a body response: tightness, hesitation, defensiveness, before you could even think. As the new pathway grows, those triggers stop firing. Or rather, they fire so weakly that you barely notice them. You walk into the room and you are simply present. You see the opportunity and you simply evaluate it. The old script does not arrive, because the brain has rerouted to the new pathway by default. The third marker is the appearance of new opportunities. The subconscious does not just respond to the world. It actively filters what you see. Most of your perception is determined by what your subconscious is looking for and what it has decided is for you. Before the identity shift, your perception was filtering for evidence of scarcity, limitation, and reasons your goals were not for someone like you. Opportunities that contradicted the old identity were quietly invisible to you, even when they were directly in front of you. After the shift, your perception begins to filter for evidence of the new identity. You start noticing opportunities you would have walked past. You start hearing comments and conversations you would have missed. You start seeing patterns and possibilities your old self had no perceptual access to. This is not magic. This is the reticular activating system, finally aimed at the world your new identity expects to find. The fourth marker is the calming of comparison. The scarcity blueprint runs on comparison. Watching other people succeed used to feel like a small wound, confirmation that something they had, you did not, and somehow never would. Comparison content was hard to consume without flinching. As the wealth identity stabilizes, comparison loses its sting. You can watch someone else win without subtracting from yourself. You can see someone 2 levels above you and feel curiosity instead of envy. You can scroll past success stories without your nervous system contracting. This is one of the most reliable signs the identity has shifted, the end of the small wound. The fifth marker is neutrality with money. For most of your life, money has been emotionally charged. Anxious checking, defensive contracting when prices go up, guilt when you spend, scarcity when you save. The relationship has been an unbroken vibration of subtle stress. As the new identity locks in, money becomes neutral. You check it without a spike. You spend without flinching. You earn without surprise. You set prices without apologizing. The relationship becomes quietly, almost boringly, calm. This is the underrated marker, the one that catches most people off guard, because they expected wealth to feel exciting, and instead, it feels like nothing in particular. Like the air is the right temperature, like nothing is wrong. That is the identity. The state where the absence of money stress is so consistent that you forget what its presence used to feel like. In video 1, I described the loop that runs every human life. Belief creates behavior. Behavior creates results. Results confirm belief. For most of your life, this loop has produced whatever your subconscious quietly believed you deserved. If the belief was scarcity, the loop produced scarcity through the decisions you made, the words you spoke, the energy you brought into rooms, the opportunities you noticed, the ones you avoided. The loop was not malfunctioning. It was working perfectly. It was producing exactly what the belief at its center demanded. The reason this series exists is to change the belief at the center. And once that belief actually changes, the same loop, using the same machinery, begins producing the opposite. Wealth identity creates wealth-aligned behavior. Wealth-aligned behavior creates wealth-creating results. Wealth-creating results confirm the wealth identity. The loop strengthens. This is why people who shift their self-image often experience what looks, from the outside, like sudden luck, a breakthrough, a windfall, a relationship that opens a door. There is no luck. There is a flywheel that is reversed direction and started spinning the other way. And once it gets going, it tends to keep going, for the same reason it kept the old direction going for so long. The loop is the loop. The only thing that changes is the direction. But here is the part most reprogramming content lies about. The old programming does not die. It quiets. It loses myelin. It stops firing in most ordinary moments, but it never fully disappears. The neural pathway is still there. And under specific conditions, extreme stress, old environments, specific triggers from the era when the old identity was running, it can briefly reactivate. You will be 3 months into the new identity, feeling solid, watching the wealth flow in, and one day you will find yourself in your parents' house or in an old conversation or in a moment of fatigue, and the scarcity script will fire. You will feel small in a way you have not felt in months. You will catch yourself thinking thoughts you no longer believe. This is normal. This is not a relapse. This is the brain offering you the old script, and the only thing you have to do is decline it. You notice, you name it, you replace it, and the old pathway, briefly fired, loses myelin again because you did not let it run to completion. The lapse strengthens the new identity, not the old one. But here is the warning that matters. The protocols are not optional after the identity locks in. The morning session, the night session, the daily anchors, none of them go away. They become quieter, lighter, more like brushing your teeth and performing surgery. But they continue. The moment you abandon them entirely, the moment you decide the work is done and the protocols can be retired, the brain begins the slow drift back to whatever environment is feeding it the most. And environments, especially the ones you grew up in, are skilled at refiring the old programming. Maintenance is light. Maintenance is forever. This is the price of permanent identity change. And it is so much smaller than the price of letting the old identity run your life that no one who has done this work would ever go back. There is a person on the other side of this series. They make decisions you currently cannot make. They charge prices you currently cannot say out loud. They walk into rooms you currently feel small in. They allow themselves things you currently feel guilty wanting. They are not a fantasy. They are not a vision board. They are the natural endpoint of the system you have learned across these 8 videos, applied with patience, repeated with consistency, allowed to compound across the months it takes for the myelin to grow. You have everything you need: the science, the windows, the protocols, the drills, the maintenance, the understanding of how regression works and how to handle it. The only variable now is whether you actually run the system, daily, quietly, long enough for the brain to do its work. The wealth identity is not earned through suffering. It is not earned through proving anything. It is built pathway by pathway, day by day, until one morning you wake up, run your session out of habit, walk through your day, and realize at some point in the late afternoon that the person you have been pushing toward is now simply the person looking back at you in the mirror. That is the destination. And it is closer than you think. This is the final video in the series. What you do with it is now yours. The morning session, the night session, the daily protocol, the anchors, the pattern interrupts, the environment design. All of it is now in your hands. The series cannot make you run it. The science cannot install itself. Identity level change has always been, and will always be, the work of the person doing it. But you now know something most people never learn. You know that the version of you who has the wealth, the freedom, the calm, and the impact is not somewhere out in front of you, waiting for the right break. They are inside you, waiting for the programming to finish. And the programming is now in your possession. If this series gave you something, subscribe to Greatness Quest Archive. There are more series coming on related domains: the mind, the nervous system, the architecture of meaningful work, the slow art of building a life that actually feels like yours. Uncover, learn, ascend.